Welcome to the Mortuary Masterclass, brought to you by the Champion Company, where preservation meets purpose, and every step is part of your journey to safer solutions. Let's talk about something that's been part of embalming since the beginning: formaldehyde. In this episode, we'll take a closer look at how it's used, what we now understand about its risks, and how that knowledge is shaping the future of our work. We'll break down both the short-term and long-term health effects of exposure. No scare tactics, just the science, so you know exactly what's at play when you're in the prep room. From there, we'll explore practical strategies embalmers are using every day to reduce exposure without sacrificing results. You'll hear commentary straight from the field, real techniques, real adjustments, and smarter choices that help limit unnecessary contact. And if you've ever wondered what alternatives can actually get the job done, we've got that covered too. We'll highlight effective solutions that minimize formaldehyde use while still giving you the tissue fixation, firmness, and preservation your cases demand. This isn't about throwing shade. It's about honoring where we came from while moving toward where we're going. If you're on your own journey to safer solutions, this episode has the roadmap. Formaldehyde has long been considered a cornerstone of modern embalming. For many embalmers, it's hard to imagine a prep room without it. It's been part of our process since the late 1800s. Missing the Civil War era, sure, but firmly establishing its place in nearly every generation of professional preservation since. It's earned that reputation. Formaldehyde has consistently delivered reliable results in firmness, disinfection, and preservation. And because of that history, many in the profession understandably hold it in high regard, sometimes to the point where its risks are overlooked or dismissed altogether. But here's where the conversation starts to shift. Recent scientific and medical research has introduced a different perspective, one that challenges us to reconsider how much formaldehyde is truly necessary in our day-to-day work. The data is clear. While every chemical in the prep room comes with some level of hazard because we're dealing with decomposition and infection control, formaldehyde ranks highest in terms of exposure risk, health impact, and long-term consequences. That includes respiratory issues, irritation, and more serious outcomes like cancer with repeated exposure. Now, that doesn't mean formaldehyde has no place in the modern embalming room. Quite the opposite. It still plays a vital role in certain case types and circumstances. But here's the encouraging part. Studies show that embalmers can reduce their formaldehyde use by up to 90% without compromising quality. Preservation, firmness, and disinfection remain intact, even improved in some cases when alternative formulations are used correctly. What does this mean for your practice? It means we're at a turning point, one where embalmers can maintain professional standards while actively lowering their own risk. This episode explores current research, compares traditional and modern formulas, and lays out a practical roadmap for reducing exposure. We'll look at case studies, product options, and techniques that support this transition, not as a replacement, but as an evolution. Because this isn't about abandoning the past, it's about acknowledging what got us here while being smart about where we go next. That's what your journey to safer solutions is all about. Let's take that next step together. Formaldehyde production in the United States exceeds 8.2 billion pounds per year, and that doesn't include what's imported. Globally, we're looking at more than 16 billion pounds annually. The vast majority of this, around 60%, is used in the construction and wood products industry, primarily in adhesives and resins. Another 30% serves as a chemical intermediate to manufacture other commercial compounds. The remainder supports plastics, textiles, and personal care items. In short, formaldehyde is everywhere. But here's what often surprises embalmers. Our profession doesn't even register on the radar when it comes to its total use. Embalming accounts for an estimated 2 to 0.03% of the U.S. formaldehyde consumption. To put that into perspective, that's less than a single day's production in the United States. It's roughly equal to what's lost each year due to off-gassing in chemical plants, according to California's environmental reports. That reality matters, because no one outside of funeral service is evaluating our exposure to risk. While other industries have shifted formulations and implemented broad safety standards, embalmers are still navigating it largely on their own. Historically, much of what the profession has believed about formaldehyde exposure is based on studies conducted prior to the 1990s, most of them during the 1970s and early 80s. At that time, permissible exposure limits were significantly higher, and the research methods reflected the standards of that era. These papers continue to be cited in textbooks, but their relevance today is limited. Their conclusions, while important historically, offer little guidance for modern-day embalmers working under updated OSHA standards and current best practices. Rather than revisit outdated findings, we'll focus on what the most current research shows and what that means for embalmers today. This isn't about removing formaldehyde from the conversation. It's about understanding our unique relationship with it and how to move forward with that awareness. Our goal is a safer, smarter chemical balance, one that delivers the results we need while reducing exposure wherever possible. That next step on the roadmap? It starts with informed choices, rethinking formulas, reducing unnecessary volume, and considering alternatives that are proven to perform without the same long-term risks. Current research since the 1990s delivers a clear message. Formaldehyde exposure has been studied thousands of pages, dozens of labs, and conclusions that consistently raise concern. Because most of these studies focus on large-scale users like construction and textiles, embalmers must map their own route by matching those findings to prep room realities. One of the first on-ramps came in 1991 when Champion's field study quantified exactly how much formaldehyde embalmers used, at what concentration, and when peak exposures hit. Results showed that routine arterial work produced exposures that hovered just under regulatory limits, but only when concentrations were moderated and substitute chemicals stepped in. In that moment, it looked as if the profession could keep exposures well below danger zones with a smarter chemical mix. In hindsight, that optimism outpaced practice. The next milestone examined glutaraldehyde. Because its vapor pressure is far lower, airborne readings were minimal, often undetectable, across a full range of cases. The takeaway was direct. When you choose a lower volatility primary, and overall exposure plummets with no visible trade-off in firmness or color. A broader investigation published in the mid-1990s offered a detailed exposure map. Personal monitor readings during embalming ranged from 0.31 parts per million to 8.72 parts per million. Short-term spikes, STL, climbed as high as 21 parts per million, especially during autopsy work and fluid spills. The average exposure across an embalming session settled around 1.4 parts per million, translating to an 8-hour TWA of roughly 0.33 parts per million, assuming no additional contact for the rest of the shift. Companion chemicals, glutaraldehyde, phenol, methanol, isopropanol, registered low, insignificant, or not detectable. Students participating in those cases reported immediate nasal and skin irritation. Follow-up tissue scrapings and blood samples painted a sharper picture. Measurable cellular changes in nasal and buccal linings, plus altered lymphocyte counts. Early markers that sustained exposure were rewriting biology. Taken together, these findings outline a clear roadmap. 1. Identify the pinch points. Peak exposures cluster around high concentration injection, cavity work, autopsy repairs, and accidental spills. 2. Dial down formaldehyde volume. Data show exposures drop sharply, often by 80% or more, when concentrations are reduced. 3. Lean on lower volatility partners. Glutaraldehyde forward or hybrid formulas keep fixation strong while airborne risk stays minimal. 4th, document results. Record firmness, color, and drainage for each case to build confident benchmarks for future mixes. Every adjustment nudges the profession closer to its next milestone on your journey to safer solutions. Honoring the legacy of formaldehyde while steering toward a prep room where performance remains high and personal risk stays low. While OSHA's 0.75 parts per million 8-hour limit and 2 parts per million short-term spike keeps us on the right side of the law, but not necessarily on the healthy side of the line. The ACGIH ceiling of -0.3 parts per million draws on deeper medical evidence. and NIOSH pushes the no-effect zone even farther to 0.016 parts per million TWA and zero point 0.1 parts per million STEL. Staying under zero point 0.3 parts per million is tough. Canadian monitoring showed 83% of embalmings blew past it, and in a 1990s champion field study, personal badges climbed from 0.31 parts per million to 8.72 parts per million, with autopsy spills spiking to 21 parts per million. The takeaway for our next milestone: OSHA is the on-ramp to legality. ASHI is the roadmap to real safety. Formaldehyde isn't just a prep room issue. New houses can read 0.03 to zero point 0.1 parts per million, mobile homes 0.2 to zero point 0.5 parts per million, and HUD now caps emissions at 0.2 parts per million for plywood and 0.3 parts per million for particle board because children lose measurable lung capacity at just 29 parts per billion. In med school labs, students breathing from zero point 0.5 to just 1 part per million for 3 hours a week needed 10 weeks for lung function to rebound. Proof that even brief, high-dose bursts leave a mark. Stretch that over a 30-year career, and the risk curve rises steadily. Detection is another blind spot. Most embalmers can't smell formaldehyde until it tops 1 part per million, triple the SCGIH ceiling, while irritation starts as low as 0.05 part per million, airway effects at 0.3 part per million, lung distress at 5 part per million, and immediately dangerous hits at 20 part per million. At 100 parts per million, the concentration used for pest control fumigation, formaldehyde is lethal. Chronic low-dose exposure has been tied to memory loss, tremors, seizures, and ranked the chemical number 4 for neurotoxicity in a 2001 survey, just behind hydrogen sulfide, PCBs, and arsenic. So the roadmap forward is clear. Moderate volumes, lean on lower volatility partners like glutaraldehyde, and document every case. Each reduction moves the profession toward the next on-ramp of your journey to safer solutions, honoring formaldehyde's legacy while steering performance and personal health onto the same path. One overlooked risk is formaldehyde and wood dust combined, often found in autopsy and hardening compounds. This mix significantly increases danger due to the respiratory impacts of both substances. In contrast, the construction industry has begun removing formaldehyde altogether. For example, Johns Manville committed to eliminating it from all insulation and board materials by 2010. Meanwhile, embalmers are still adding it into particulate compounds. Health agencies around the world agree. Formaldehyde is a known carcinogen. OSHA, NIOSH, ACGIH, EPA, IARC, and the National Toxicology Program all classify it accordingly. It's one of the few legally mandated substances that require additional workplace monitoring and signage. In most embalming rooms, it's the only carcinogen in use. Even wood dust, present in many compounds, is itself classified as a standalone carcinogen. Combined, they create one of the most hazardous scenarios in the prep room. Formaldehyde is also a documented allergen and sensitizer, linked to both skin-based contact dermatitis and respiratory-triggered asthma. The IgE-mediated response can escalate into serious systemic health problems, so much so that dermatologists include formaldehyde in standard allergen patch testing. In the dental industry, it is actively phased out due to severe allergic reactions linked to glues and bonding agents. There's an additional concern that cannot be overstated: pregnancy and reproductive risk. Numerous studies link formaldehyde and organic solvent exposure to birth defects, spontaneous miscarriage, short-term pregnancy loss, and reduced fertility. The recommendation is clear: pregnant embalmers should avoid formaldehyde exposure altogether, and if embalming is unavoidable, it must be done with full protective gear, including impervious garments and a formaldehyde-specific respirator. The takeaway isn't fear, it's informed action. Embalmers have more control now than ever in choosing safer chemical combinations. Substituting formaldehyde in high-impact areas like cavity treatment, sprays, and hardening compounds can reduce total room exposure by 80 to 90%, with no loss in preservation or performance. Glutaraldehyde-based cavity fluids, coarse pre-wetted granules, and modern surface disinfectants offer equal or superior efficacy with significantly lower vapor pressure. Even arterial injections, often considered a lower-risk procedure, can be modified. Many embalmers now inject alternative fluids through most of the process and add only a small final volume of formaldehyde, sometimes as little as an ounce, to produce traditional firmness and drying. For edema cases, specialty formulations using glutaraldehyde, hypertonic salt solutions, and small formaldehyde spikes provide the dehydration and tissue shrinkage needed without flooding the room with gas. This is the roadmap forward, honoring the role formaldehyde has played but moving toward a prep room where health and safety don't have to compete with performance. Every measured adjustment brings us closer to the next milestone. Thanks for tuning in to this special edition of the Mortuary Masterclass. Until next time, keep doing what you do best, championing the prep room with purpose, because embalmers matter, and every step forward is part of your journey to safer solutions.